Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the National Space Centre's Yuri's Night celebration. To introduce myself, my name is Josh, and I'm the Planetarium Coordinator and part of the Space Communications team. And I'm joined here by Sophie Allen from the National Space Academy, who's our lead teacher. And we're going to celebrate, along with you guys, 60 years of human spaceflight. Yuri's Night celebrates Yuri Gagarin's famous very first human spaceflight, and also represents the anniversary of the space shuttle. So how have you been doing, Sophie? How's the academy been going?
Yeah, very well. We had our symposium last week, which is where we get all of our lead educators, our network of outstanding teachers from across the UK, got them all together online and talked about what we're hoping to achieve in the next year, some exciting new projects that are coming up. And of course, our big focus is on our space engineering students. So getting them through this last push of their A-levels for our year 13s, and excitingly, getting ready for our rocket camp that we're going to be having at the end of the academic year. So very busy.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad that you could take your some time out of your busy schedule to join me this evening, because it really is an amazing anniversary. It's quite unbelievable that for the last 60 years we've been sending, not just things but people into space to go and explore. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about Yuri's flight all those years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So on this day, 12th of April, 1961, a 27-year-old Soviet pilot called Yuri Gagarin launched on a Vostok rocket from Kazakhstan. And he completed an orbit of the Earth, returned safely to the ground, which officially made him the first astronaut or cosmonaut. And so on this day every year, we celebrate past, present, and future human exploration in space.
Fantastic. Yeah, and it's really nice to be able to come together and do this. It's really been nice as well for probably one of the first times that we've done this, but being able to do it live online, as seems to have become the vogue over the last year because of this current situation. And it's great to see so many people in the chat joining us as well, because there's lots of viewers here. And also, I mentioned to you just before we started, it's amazing to see people from all over the world joining us as well, because this really is a global celebration. I think it has turned into sort of the world space party. And that's because it doesn't just celebrate Russia and Yuri's launch, but also America very famously launched their first space shuttle flight on the 20th anniversary of Yuri going into space, which obviously makes that the 40th anniversary today as we speak. So yeah, we saw that fantastic shuttle mission take off, and watching the shuttle take off was always something that I was always amazed by. I don't know about you.
Yeah, and I think for us particularly, Josh, for you and I, the shuttle era was our era of human spaceflight. It was the era that we grew up with and grew up in. So I was always blown away by Yuri Gagarin and by what was going on during those times. But for me, my first real introduction to human spaceflight was in the 80s and the 90s through the space shuttle program. And so it's always great to have global celebration of some of these really huge achievements of humankind.
Yeah, you're definitely right. The space shuttle really that's the thing I remember watching take off. And like I said, nowadays you see that change. But, it's an amazing achievement to say. I think it was something like 130 launches over 30 years, which was truly amazing. And obviously it was partly reusable, which is a big thing we've been talking about recently in space flight. So I think it was a real, changed our understanding of what we could do with spaceflight. We're going to be looking a little bit about that today. So coming up tonight, we're going to try and find out a little bit more about the space race that got us started with some of that early space flight. We're going to be hearing from an astronaut and what Yuri's Night means to them. And we're also going to be looking towards the future of spaceflight as well, with NASA's plans for Project Artemis. So hopefully you guys are here to join us this evening, and you're going to watch along. If you've got any questions this evening as well, do let us know, and we'll do our very best to answer them to the best of our abilities. And I guess I've got a question to kickstart as well. People are thinking of theirs. Can you perhaps tell us a bit more about the space race, Sophie? We mentioned it earlier, and I know you know quite a bit about it.
I do know quite a lot about it. So it was the big fight to get to the moon, basically, to be the first people to do that. But actually, I think rather than have me talk about that, Josh, I think we can get our friend Claire to tell everyone about the space race.
Indeed, I think we could be. In fact, I think we can go one better for Claire. Since it's a special event here today, I think we're going to hear from our director of the National Space Academy, a gentleman called Anu Ojar, who he is definitely as obsessed with space as we are, and I'm sure he's got some fantastic information for us. So let's hear from Anu Ojar.
Hello, I'm Anu Ojar from the National Space Centre, and today I want to explain why nearly 60 years ago there was an epic race to get the first human beings onto the surface of this, the Moon, nearly 250,000 miles away. Now, I'd like to say that the reason the United States and the Soviet Union were racing each other was in the name of science, but actually it wasn't. It was all down to politics. Because after World War II, what emerged were two competing political systems. It was communism against capitalism, the Soviet Union against the United States. And what better way to show the rest of the world the superiority of your system than by getting human beings not only to the final frontier, getting into space, but getting to the Moon and back again. And that was the reason why President Kennedy set one of the boldest national goals that the United States has ever seen, the challenge of Project Apollo.
So yeah, we can see there that the race to land on the moon was truly that political motivation that we saw. And as someone, Dave mentioned in the comments, that fantastic moon model of Anu's that often floats around the Space Centre for special events. I'd quite like one.
I definitely would. And he's got a fantastic collection, hasn't he?
He does have a lot of cool stuff, and we're very lucky that he often brings it in for us to have a little look at. In terms of people mentioning things in the comments, we did have a question earlier, not quite to do with the moon, but in fact Mars. Obviously, Mars is currently a big topic at the moment. We saw a few months ago the landing of the Perseverance rover from NASA on its surface. And coming up this month, we got something very, very exciting, which is the flight of the helicopter. So for the first time, we're sending a helicopter up to the surface of the planet, and they're going to test it. And I believe, I think it was last week, it spent its first night on the surface, and hopefully in the next couple of days or weeks, they want to try and fly it. Are you confident, Sophie, do you think? Are we going to see some amazing technology going ahead?
I am. I think, given the audacity of the project, I mean, when you think about the fact that Perseverance and its predecessor Curiosity, they landed on the planet on a sky crane, a jet-powered sky crane, lowering the craft to the surface of Mars. And, the first time that happened, it was considered audacious and risky, and we've now seen that has been successful twice, and they've put a lot of thought into the Ingenuity helicopter. So they have tested it, they have really considered absolutely everything to do with the environmental conditions, the surface conditions, the fact that Mars has such a thinner atmosphere than the Earth. So I'm extremely hopeful and genuinely really excited to see the first powered flight on another planet.
Yeah, I think that'll be really exciting. And I think, tonight's a great night to reflect on, where we started 60 years ago. Dreams of sending people to the moon were, complete and utter almost fantasy. And now we're at a point in which, we're sending, not just people out there into space, people living on board space stations, but even whole new types of vehicles to sort of fly around on other planets and stuff. I think it's really brings that home. And I think 60 years feels like a long time to someone like myself and perhaps you, but I've got family members that are older than that and have seen that entire journey. And I think for it to have happened so quickly is something that I always reflect on and think is truly amazing, as to see what will happen across there. So the Apollo program, obviously, and the space race, we saw this kickstarted essentially by Yuri Gagarin's flight, the Sputnik 1 flight a couple of years before that by Russia, sort of establishing early dominance into space. And Russia did really well. I think that's one thing with the space race that always comes as a surprise. Sputnik 1 was the first ever satellite. It was Russian. Following that, we had Sputnik 2, the first living creature to orbit around the Earth. Again, it was Russian. Then we sent people into space, and that was, of course, Yuri Gagarin, one of the reasons we're here tonight, Russian. Then we saw women go into space, Valentina Tereshkova, as you might have guessed, Russian. First spacewalk was Alexei Leonov, and it was just Russia all the way. It was Russia, Russia, Russia. And then all of a sudden, we saw the Apollo program that Anu mentioned, this amazing project that saw people go all the way to the moon. It was a truly amazing goal set by the Americans to sort of say, hang on a minute, it's not just the Russians that are doing this cool stuff. And I think that motivation must be really powerful. It's definitely something that I think we see, and I know we often talk about that story here, but obviously it only took us up till the 70s, and so a question we get asked, I know I get asked a lot, and I'm sure you do, is why did we stop going? And I think that's a big one to answer, and I think I'm going to leave that one to Anu, who's a little bit more comfortable delving into the politics of the situation, to tell us a little bit more about that. So let's hear from Anu about why we stopped going to the moon.
So in the 1960s, the space world was dominated by this space race. And as the decade went on, in the early years, it looked like the Soviet Union were getting ahead in rehearsing all of the stages necessary to get a human being to the moon and back. The world's first multi-person spacecraft, the world's first spacewalk. But by 1964-65, it was clear that the Americans with their Gemini program were racing ahead. And this culminated, of course, in the triumph of Project Apollo. In these 4 magical years between 1968 and 1972, the 24 astronauts who went to the moon and the 12 who walked on its surface became the only members of the human race to have ever directly explored an alien world. And the science that they brought back transformed our understanding not only of the moon, but also of the geological understanding of the Earth itself. But in 1972, after 6 successful landing missions, the entire program stopped. Many people ask, why? Well, the answer was a combination of politics and also budgets. Because Project Apollo, at its height in the mid-1960s, when spending was maximum, it was taking 5% of the United States budget. And people in America were questioning, why are we spending all of this money? Well, as long as there was a race on, that was justified. But as soon as the first landing with Apollo 11 and return to Earth was completed, people began asking, why are we carrying on doing this? Well, of course, the later lunar missions were all about science, and especially the last 3 missions, Apollos 15, 16 and 17, where they took the lunar rover onto the surface, where each mission spent 3 days doing geological investigations. The science return was tremendous. But by then, the decisions were made that Project Apollo would finish. And instead, from the Soviet Union's perspective, having lost the race to the moon, they decided to focus on space stations. Because the longest flight to the moon and back was only about 12 days long. What would it take to keep a human being alive in space, not for 2 weeks, but for a month, for 3 months, for 6 months or longer still? And so the Soviets began investing in space stations, orbiting just a few hundred kilometers above the Earth, but as a platform on which their cosmonauts could do more and more science. In the United States, the focus was different. How could we make space travel and access to space cheaper? The answer was the development of the space shuttle. Because it was partially reusable, some parts of it, like the orbiter, could be used for mission after mission, unlike the previous spacecraft, which were pretty much one use only. And so, after the triumphs of Project Apollo, what we saw was a bit of a retreat. Instead of looking at human exploration, it was about how can humans use the environment much closer to Earth, in what should we call low Earth orbit, and build our experience base. And of course, all of that work culminated in the largest human spaceflight engineering project in history, the International Space Station.
So we can see there a lot of the different approaches to space flight, and we can see this, continual growth to go up. And I think we had a question a little bit looking towards the future, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But I thought it's probably a good one to touch on. This is Celine, and she was asking who's going to be the next human on the moon. Since we've started talking about that, you got any ideas, Soph?
Yeah, I mean it's exciting times. Obviously, NASA has its own plans to send humans back to the moon with its Artemis program, which I think we're going to look at in a little bit more detail later on. But we were talking about space race earlier on, and how that whole process of getting humans onto the surface of the moon was accelerated by this, the political side of things, and also by the competition side of things. Now, the Chinese Space Agency has made incredibly fast leaps in their both robotic and crewed spaceflight programs. They've had the advantage of having seen people do it before, but what they've achieved in a relatively short space of time is remarkable. And they've sent several Chang'e rovers to the surface of the moon already, and they're accelerating their human spaceflight program. So it wouldn't be amazingly surprising to me if some kind of new space race were to develop, and if potentially the next footsteps on the moon might be Chinese. It all depends on the Artemis program as well. Obviously, the Artemis program is going to have a bit more international collaboration. China's very keen for their mission to be a very Chinese mission. But for me, it's very exciting, because when you've got that element of competition, then you've got extra things spurring you on to do it. So possibly Chinese, possibly American/international, hopefully a woman.
Yeah, it would be good to see a little bit more diversity on the surface of the moon. The Apollo program was definitely something amazing, but it was a product of its time. It is a little disappointing. I always think that it's a particular type of person that gets all the way there, but still an amazing achievement to do so. And I think those early days were really cool. There's some brilliant people mentioning some of the history of the astronauts as well. So Yuri Gagarin and his background in steelwork. So Torrin keeping us up to date with those things across there. And quite rightly, and obviously there's so much that we could talk about. I know Karen has commented that we've skipped over a couple of space stations, and we could talk for hours about the Salyut program and Skylab and everything that's led to these points. And I think Anu finished talking there about the space station that's currently up there, and I think that's one of the other things that I found amazing about the space race was that we went from this this really heated competition to very quickly actually collaborating. You saw the space race happen. It was all about who could get there. Secrecy was high, push it. And then once we got there, we sort of said, oh, okay, we've done it. But actually, you did some things really well, and we've done some things really well. And actually, maybe it doesn't make sense to compete, and maybe it does make sense to work together. And so we saw, those space stations that we just mentioned working together, and then everything was brought together about 20 years ago with the International Space Station and the construction and the plan like that. And I think certainly that's one of the feelings I get nowadays, is that space is much more a collaborative effort. We are still seeing that there's individual bits that we talk about. You mentioned, China's got their own set of space stations, but we're more and more, we are starting to help each other out and learn a little bit about that. And our good friend Claire talked a little bit about that. Have you got some input? Did you say that? Go on. You look like you were going to say something, Soph.
I was just going to say that I think international collaboration is vital now, with the cost and the experience needed to send things up there. And of course, when we look towards future missions like the Lunar Orbital Gateway, which is going to be an international station at the moon that will allow access for lunar research, that's very much going to have an international feel to it as well. And ever since Apollo-Soyuz, that first international meeting in space between the Soviet and the American space programs, we've made such headway in sharing our ideas, sharing our knowledge, and for me, that's definitely the future.
Definitely. I think Claire has commented, teamwork makes the dream work, and I think that sums it up quite nicely. So yeah, let's hear from Claire a little bit about how more of that collaboration happened with things like the Soyuz Apollo test program, and let's hear a bit more about that international collaboration.
Space exploration and competition go hand in hand, or maybe it's just more obvious than the collaboration that's always been there. Case in point, the space race. In 1957, Sputnik was launched by the Soviet Union to become the first artificial Earth satellite. It is seen as the start of the space race, with the Soviet Union and the United States one-upping each other until they could do so no more. A month later, the Soviets followed up Sputnik with Laika the dog, the first animal to orbit the Earth. The US then entered the race by putting their own satellite Explorer 1 into orbit in 1958. Then the Soviets hit back with another milestone, Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, in 1961. Whilst all these space firsts were being competed for by the US and Soviets, the United Nations were striving for peace in space by implementing space law. Yes, space law is a real thing. Starting with the Outer Space Treaty, first signed in 1967 by the US, Soviet Union and the UK. It instilled that the exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, and shall be the province of all mankind. 2 years later, the United States seemed to secure their victory in the space race by landing a man on the moon. Neil Armstrong said it himself, landing on the moon was one giant leap for mankind. To emphasise this, a brick-sized piece of the moon was brought back on Apollo 17, known as the Goodwill Rock. It was broken up and distributed to all US states and the nations of the world to unify human endeavour. But I don't think America landing on the moon was the true end of the space race. That came in 1975. The Apollo-Soyuz test project was the first international space mission. The US Apollo spacecraft docking with the Soviet Soyuz spacecraft, uniting a crew of 5 and uniting 2 space superpowers. The same year the European Space Agency was officially established, but Europe had already been working together since the early 1960s. After the Apollo-Soyuz project, the collaboration between the two continued with the Shuttle Mir program, the US space shuttle docking with the Soviet Union space station Mir, leading to the biggest demonstration of international collaboration, the International Space Station. It took 10 years and more than 30 missions to assemble, with collaboration among 5 space agencies, the US, Russia, Canada, Japan and the European Space Agency, representing 15 countries. Over 20 years, 241 individuals from 19 countries have visited the ISS, doing research in microgravity to help us all down here on Earth. Having remained in low Earth orbit for quite some time, space agencies are setting their sights on going back to the moon, along with companies like SpaceX. So is there a new space race developing? It may seem that way again. There's nothing wrong with a little healthy competition. It can further the whole field, and we wouldn't be where we are today without it. But it's important to remember we are all striving for the same goal, to further humankind's space exploration, and we will go further by working together. Things are already looking different to the last moon landing. Australia, Canada, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom and the United States of America have all signed the Artemis Accords, probably the most prominent mission to the moon, headed by NASA. Maybe less well-known collaboration is the joint effort of space agencies to utilise satellites to look after our planet as a whole. The Committee on Earth Observation Satellites was first established in 1984 to coordinate and harmonise Earth observations to make it easier for the user community to access and use data. Then came the International Charter for Space and Major Disasters. It uses satellite data to help those affected by natural or man-made disasters. It's been in place since the year 2000 and now includes 17 space agencies and space system operators. The Charter has been used 680 times to support disasters in 126 countries over the past 20 years. With all this collaboration, hopefully one day we'll reach Mars. But what will the first flag planted on Mars be? Maybe a Planet Earth one. We are all representatives of Planet Earth, and there has been a flag developed to show this. Oscar Pernefeld created this flag to be used while representing Planet Earth and to remind the people of Earth that we share this planet, no matter of national boundaries, that we should take care of each other and the planet we live on. I think it would look pretty good on the surface of Mars, and Martians wouldn't know us by our nationalities, they'd just see us as Earthlings.
So some great insights there from Claire about a lot of that collaboration that's been happening and continuing to happen as we look forward and continue to explore space. So have there been any more good questions that you've spotted come through, Soph?
Yeah, well, talking about launching so many things into space, of course, that does come with its own particular set of problems. And that is that our, space environment is getting quite cluttered. And I do have a question from Christina, who says, is there any program planned concerning rubbish collection from planetary bodies such as Moon and Mars, and recycling. So in terms of collecting rubbish from the Moon and Mars, we've left relatively little there so far. On the Moon, obviously, we have got the hardware left over from the Apollo missions, which you can actually see from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in orbit. And, those things are staying there. And apart from radiation damage, then, largely as they would have been when they were left. So there is stuff on the Moon. Now, the problem with potentially bringing that stuff back is that it's extremely expensive to bring those in. You'd need to take a large craft to remove them. And so for the moment, I suspect that they will be staying there almost as a kind of, memento of the human space race. Where we have got big issues is with space debris. We have over 2,000 live satellites in orbit, and that number's going up every day, particularly with launches of things like Starlink. And there are more than 3,000 failed or dead satellites up there. Huge amount of space junk up there. Now, the European Space Agency has got a plan to start trying to tackle this, because Christina did say it's high time that we look at these kind of things. The European Space Agency is going to be launching a mission called Clear Space 1, which is going to go into orbit, and it's going to use a robotic arm to try and grab the payload adapter that was used to launch a satellite called Proba 5 into orbit. And it's going to grab hold of that, and then it's going to deorbit itself to burn up in the atmosphere along with that piece of space hardware. The problem is it costs a lot of money, and it's very difficult to send stuff into space. And then if we're having to send stuff after it, that's more money. But certainly we have a responsibility to do something about it. And also, the more stuff is out there, the harder it is for future space missions.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely something that I've seen more people becoming aware of. I know nowadays most modern satellites tend to have an exit plan, for things that are going to happen to them once they reach the end of their lives. And yeah, ESA are really doing some interesting stuff. I think I saw plans for a spacecraft with a harpoon to try and harpoon spacecraft, and they've got plans about painting them and shooting them with lasers to cause them to evaporate, and all sorts of some weird and wonderful stuff. But yeah, I think it is interesting making sure that we are respectful of space as an environment. It is an environment. It's not just down here on Earth that we have those issues.
Absolutely. And if we're looking, particularly if we're looking from an astrobiology point of view, if we're wanting to, potentially find signs of life, then actually we want to be being very careful about what we send to the surface of planets and moons anyway, because, every time we send something, we run the risk of introducing, evidence of biological life, but evidence of our biological life. So it is, it's not just the reducing the things that we send, but it's making sure that what we send is biologically clean so that we don't contaminate those environments.
Yeah, I'd hate for the first aliens we found to just be us, someone who sneezed on a satellite in a clean room or something. It would not be the best, would it? So, but yeah, I think that going forward and looking at this future, and it's interesting we mentioned ESA, because I was very lucky last week, Sophie, because I got to speak to an ESA astronaut. We thought if we're going to be celebrating human spaceflight, unfortunately, as of yet, myself and you haven't yet had the opportunity to go into space. So we thought we'd probably bring in somebody that had. This is someone that I think you know quite well. I think you've interacted and spoken to him a little bit before. So this is a chap called Reinhold Ewald, who's a German astronaut who flew to Mir. He's worked in, I think, every department to do with human spaceflight since then. He's led missions, managed them, trained people, and I think now he's relaxing a little bit, doing some teaching at Stuttgart University, as well as lots of other bits and pieces. But we thought, seeing as he'd been into space, he'd flown Mir, he'd flown the Soyuz, he would be a great person to tell us a little bit about what that was like. And what we're looking forward to space. So I've got an interview here that I'd like to share with you guys. So this is Reinhold. Thank you. Okay, well, good morning. It's lovely to see you, Reinhold. Thank you very much for joining us for our Yuri's Night celebrations here today. So just a couple of quick questions. Obviously, you've had a very varied and storied career in spaceflight, spanning all sorts of areas of human spaceflight, from managing missions to supervising experiments to even going into space yourself. And so something like Yuri's Night, a celebration of human spaceflight, must mean a great deal to someone like yourself. What sort of does that celebration mean to you?
it reminds us that there are always pioneering times, and the excitement of the pioneering times is still there in the space teams that do space flight. So I had the lucky circumstance that I could fly into space myself, and everyone is convinced that this is exciting, that you're fully motivated. No, but it was more so. It radiated down to the teams on the ground that supported me. And after my 21 days in space on the Mir space station back in '97, I worked 21 years in these very teams on the grounds and felt the same excitement and the same motivation to carry on what was initiated 60 years ago.
Excellent. And that motivation and that inspiration, events like Yuri's Night are a great way to share with all sorts of people, not just younger people, to get them excited about space. What was it that inspired you along this amazing career path that you've taken? What got you first interested in space?
Actually, it was not that I directed my studies to later become an astronaut or cosmonaut, but it happened that I took all the right turns during my choices for university, the subjects that I took, in order to be able to work in space and do these things. So I studied radio astronomy, which already points that I was looking to the big questions of life. Where do we come from? How do planets, how do solar systems, how do galaxies form? And that later made me not hesitate a second when I had a chance to apply as an astronaut, to be in person there where I want to research the big questions.
So that celebration and that's something that often surprises our visitors, that idea that you don't become an astronaut straight out of school. Often it's something that you work on other stuff and then eventually, move into this amazing career. And it's interesting you talk about that application, because that's something that ESA, the European Space Agency, they've just opened their recruitment program for astronauts. So is there any advice you'd perhaps give to people that were thinking about taking the plunge and applying to guide them along that process?
I think the main message is trust yourself. Don't deselect yourself before you even apply. Don't say I have this item not correctly. My health is in this respect compromised. No, just try your luck, because already the process teaches you what they the selection team are looking for, and whether you match these criteria or not. Otherwise, you would never know. And as the chances of actually going through and becoming one of the 4 or 5 or 6 final candidates to be chosen for the ESA astronaut corps is rather scarce, I would say have a plan B. I mean, take this experience and turn it into something, for example, in a spaceflight job. It will be challenging. It will be as good as flying yourself once you moved into these teams.
Yeah, definitely, and you are right. There's a huge team of people that support astronauts down on the ground, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. But obviously, being in space is something that a lot of people are very interested in, and you got that fantastic opportunity to go up to the Mir space station, which really, sort of laid the groundwork for the International Space Station that everyone's familiar with there. Could you give us a bit of insight to what your experience on that station was like?
Actually, first you had to acquaint yourself with the Russian way of doing things. That was I was born and raised in the west of Germany, so I had no exposure to Russian language or Russian culture before I actually started my training back in 1990. So this was a whole new world, and we by and by came to the conclusion that there are many ways to do serious and effective spaceflight. One at that time was the space shuttle, and everyone was amazed by this mighty vehicle doing marvelous things in space, also with some risk, as we could see. But now the world of space stations opened up, and I was at the seams of when those two worlds met. I would have liked to be caught by to meet the shuttle in space and probably ride it down to Earth, but that didn't happen. So I went up and down in Soyuz, but there was enough of those two possibilities to do spaceflight that made the Mir so successful.
Yeah, it really is a a fundamental shift in what we did in space. This idea of not just going up for a handful of days, but actually being able to do a lot of long form work up there really changed what we could use space for. And I think that's something that, looking into your career, is something we see a lot of. You've done an enormous amount of experiments as part of your time on Mir. On top of that, you've also managed and led the operations that helped to deliver things like the Columbus module from the European Space Station to the International Space Station. So how important is this microgravity environment of space, and how important is the research that we do up there?
Because this is one of the questions we have to answer in order to kind of justify in a rational way and rather than an emotional way why we are there. I think that the International Space Station now primarily serves as a blue pause, as a print for future such spaceflight exploration missions, like going back to the moon. You will notice that the Gateway is also an international, but as we have this International Space Station, we equipped it with the most sophisticated material to really do groundbreaking science. And in my case, it was more or less limited to what I could take with me, but still we had results in fields of human physiology that are still creating papers right now in actual research. I mentioned the subject of the sodium storage inside your body, which was before my flight not known to the medical world, and with the data that my flight produced, we went along that way to research that. And there are many things now more sophisticated, even like genetic engineering or looking into pharmaceuticals or coming to the frontiers of physics in terms of overheated fluids or overcritical material that we can't do in a gravity environment. We have to have this assured long-term microgravity environment of space stations, and namely now the International Space Station, to do this experimentation.
Fantastic. And I think that changes. That is really interesting. You talked about the future of space flight, seeing with gateways looking at starting up. ESA have been talking about building a base on the moon, something like that. We're seeing China start to build space stations as well. So we're really starting to see some changes. And I'm sure throughout your career, you've seen, the advancement of human space flight. What are you most excited about in the near future? What do you think's coming up that has really got you excited about what's happening up there?
I still can't really appreciate enough that I'm living in this century where all this is happening. I mean, imagine I have been born at the times of Jules Verne. I would have read his literature, but not being able to contribute to live with it myself. So these are exciting times, and we have been pioneers in many ways, as you mentioned, with the first Western use of the Mir space station, the foundations of the ISS. There will be other pioneer times coming up, like returning to the moon, or rather going forward to the moon, as ESA puts it, and doing more things than have been possible with the one-shot Apollo times on the moon, and going on. Next big goal, next big target would be Mars, and every little piece that we learn today is helping us along the way. And I probably sit in a rocking chair and watch the generation Mars take the first steps on that planet.
It will be really exciting times. I think that's definitely the sort of thing I'm looking forward to, and I've been really excited by a lot of the move for private industry to get involved. Things like the beam inflatable module, looking at whether we can use that to massively increase the amount of space we've got available to us, and seeing how it develops just even beyond what we're doing as countries. I find that really fascinating. So I think we're about to enter a really exciting time for space flight. I think. So we've talked sort of quite big questions here. So I've got a couple of quick, perhaps a little shorter questions, just to capture some snapshots of your thoughts. So what would you say has been your highlight of your career? Obviously, you've worked in a huge amount of different environments for different reasons, doing different things. What stands out to you as some of your favourite moments?
I mean, these missions that I've been able to be involved in, the very first where I was a backup cosmonaut, helping my colleague to go through the flight program. The second one where I flew myself, naturally are the water in which I started swimming. And I'm now educating at Stuttgart University young master students of aerospace engineering. And I try to really relate to them that space flight is something where in a very short period of time, with all your knowledge, you can really help moving things forward and be part of a progress that probably takes much longer in other fields of science and technology. So yes, we are democratizing space, as some people put it, by adding new vehicles, adding new possibilities to come to space. The only hope I have, this is not a short answer, but a very serious one. The only hope is that the people that probably now enter into flight training and later have the chance to fly take it as serious as we did. It is a challenge. It is a risk. It should be for the benefit of humankind and not for just personal fun.
I think that's a really good point, and I think keeping an eye on those, it's as much as we go to space regularly. We would, on the day we're doing this interview, we saw another rocket just take off this morning, and it does almost start to feel routine. But you're right, it's an incredibly challenging environment that needs to be treated with respect. So I think it's a very good point. Another one. What was your favourite moment of being in space? We've got lots of people talk about, is it cool to float or to see the Earth? What was that highlight moment of being in space for you?
That's something that I also thought of doing in my second space flight, which probably won't come along. But anyhow, so take more time to feel these sensations in the sense of bodily sensations, floating or the look down on Earth, the look out into the universe. My mission was 3 weeks, so you think I had plenty of time to look out of the window. No, that was not the case. It was cut away from doing other experiment business or whatever, that I took the time to look out of the window. I would do that more often in my second flight. But the moments where we were all together and felt that we are feeling the same thing, observing Earth or sharing a moment in weightlessness, that were the very intense moments, and I'm still attached to my crews, which trained with and whom I flew with.
Oh, that's really good to hear. That moment of togetherness, I'm sure in the isolation of space, is a real nice feeling to fall back on. I guess other than picking your own, what's been your perhaps favourite space mission that you've either seen or witnessed, been part of, or even just been observed? What's been your favourite space mission? But you can't pick your own.
I had the luck of going through a rather medium term, it's called a long-term flight, but I didn't go through the 6 months or even the year that we have seen in space. A short-term mission is different, and a short-term mission can produce a lot of results. I jokingly always challenge my colleague Gerhard Thiele, who did a shuttle flight observing the Earth and taking a height profile of the Earth, which is still in use today. So he didn't have any medical interventions, which I had plenty of, and he could observe Earth all the way and fly this vehicle, the shuttle, and safely arrived back. So that would be a mission where I would say it's the contrast to what I have been doing, and that would be interesting. But I think I'm not a candidate for Moon or Mars because this is something where a whole career is directed to. I'm at the end of my career. I'm happy teaching, but you need the motivation and probably the freshness of expectations in order to stand through all that is needed for a Moon or Mars mission.
Excellent. And just to finish off with a little bit of, I guess, fantasy, but if we assume we invent a magical spacecraft that could take us anywhere in the universe safely, what is on your number one list of places to visit? Obviously, I know you started out studying deep space, but if you could go anywhere in the universe safely and within a reasonable time frame, where would you like to visit?
The restaurant at the end of the universe, you mean? Yeah? No, I think the big question is are we alone in this universe? And we have the clues right in next to our front doors. It's Mars and it's the icy moons of Jupiter that would be interesting to visit. So and etc. So these would be the targets in a safe and also affordable manner to visit and see whether these places indicate the solution of this big riddle that we are chasing.
Excellent. Yeah, I think Europa is definitely on my list of places that I'd love to see us explore a little more. It's a great opportunity to see some stuff out there, and like you say, answer these big questions, which is, what's human spaceflight is ultimately there to do, to push us the human boundary a little bit further, and to answer those questions. So that's absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much, Reinhold, for joining us for your interview here today. It's been a great pleasure. I hope that your Yuri's Night celebrations go really well, and you have a great time celebrating those across there. So thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
There are always two words that are mentioned when cosmonauts and astronauts meet. The one thing is repeating the word of Gagarin. He said, "Поехали, let's go on." But at the same time, we wish each other "Miarkoi Pasatki," which means have a safe landing.
Well, Miarkoi Pasatki, I probably butchered that, but thank you so much, Reinhold.
Bye-bye.
We're live now? Awesome. Well, that was a lovely video, and I really love watching Reinhold in action. I've been lucky enough to work with him at the European Space Agency's annual teacher residential that they hold out in ESTEC in Holland. And he's always been so passionate about, bringing in educators and bringing in, young people into what he's doing and spreading the word of space exploration. And I think, as we saw there, he had such an interesting experience up on Mir. So yeah, just always really love chatting to him.
Yeah, it was really nice to. This was the first time that I'd met him, but he's a really lovely chap and really friendly, and it was really nice to see his insight. He truly has had an amazing career. Like I said at the start, he worked in program management. He's worked in all sorts of avenues of human spaceflight, and then shares the passion that we have for teaching and sharing. So it was really cool to get a chance to speak to him, and I look forward to perhaps seeing him in person. I know he said he was keen to come back across when we can, once everything returns back to normal.
When we're allowed.
Yes, when we're allowed indeed. I did see another question come through from Conrad, who was talking a little bit about still on the space race, obviously we talked about earlier, and he asked, would the Soviets have beaten the US to the moon if it had not been for Sergei Korolev's death in the mid-60s? And then he goes on to ask who was the most innovative engineer. Was it Korolev or Wernher von Braun, who famously helped the NASA program? So that's a real tricky one. I don't know if you've got any insights, thoughts that immediately spring to mind.
It is a tricky one. There's no doubt that Korolev's passing in '66, I think it was, from complications arising from colon cancer, it left a massive vacuum. So, you have to remember that both sides, both the American side and the Soviet side, they were starting their space program based on German V2 technology. So the Americans had, they captured some of the scientists, including von Braun, who'd been heading up that program, and they had quite a lot of the actual V2 rockets. But the Soviets had the plans to the rockets and some of their own V2 scientists as well. And so Korolev was very, very quick to start adapting and then completely redesigning the V2 technology. You have to remember that he was, kind of being able to build upon the knowledge that Konstantin Tsiolkovsky had developed around liquid-fueled rockets and the mathematics of how they work. And so very quickly through the R series of rockets, Korolev was able to go from a V2 copy to something completely new. And then by the time they got up to the R7, they were miles ahead of where the American space program was. And so, as we discussed earlier, they had all of those first, including, the first flyby of the moon with Luna 1. And then in September of '59, the first landing, hard landing on the moon. And the other thing is that, Korolev was very much the personality behind the Soviet space program. The government at the time, it was interested in it, but it was skeptical about spending so much money on the program. But because they had so many early successes, the public was really invested and really behind the space program. And that, combined with the figurehead nature of Korolev, really drove that program forward. When he passed in 66, that left a massive vacuum. Several other engineers had kind of been vying for his role within the Soviet space organization. And then as soon as they started developing Soyuz, it was beset by a huge number of technical problems, which set the entire project back. I'm pretty certain that if Korolev hadn't died in the mid-60s, he might have been able to power things forward a little bit. But it's hard to tell, isn't it?
I think you're right. It's because they were both such forces that really drove that innovation. It wasn't just that they were really clever and they could figure this stuff out, but they were both really passionate about really exploring what could be done and in this new frontier. So I think it's a great what if question. How would things have changed? In terms of innovation, I mean it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other, and you of course mentioned other people as well, people like Tsiolkovsky that we've not even mentioned that you probably should, and there's so many people that work these hard, but I think it'd be difficult to pick which one. I know von Braun, the Saturn V is something that's iconic. I always look for the Korolev cross when the boosters fly off, the Soyuz, which we still see nowadays, and I think they were both real examples of people at the top of their game that were really driving these things. So I think it's a fascinating question. I don't know what the audience think, or if people have got thoughts on those, but it's
Tell us
a tricky
what you
one.
think in the comments.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting, and I guess just to touch back on Reinhold, you like I say, you know him quite well through the academy. He's done quite a lot to help you guys out, hasn't he?
Yeah, so as I say, we worked with him at the European Space Agency summer camps, and then he's also, he's quite happy to consult on projects, and he's really useful to sound out if anyone's ever got a question about human space flight. He's extremely open to working with educators, and it's fantastic, people like him and Tim Peake and others, they're willing to give up their time and their experience to bring the inspiring context of space to students, and hopefully use that as a way of getting them really interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering and math subjects. And he's just a real pleasure to talk to. He's such an engaging guy.
Yeah, and I think I find that with a lot of astronauts is that they all, regardless of where they've come from or their backgrounds or what they've done in space, they all seem to be, they all share that passion, which is really nice, and they really help. And I think it also shows in the fact that that's what astronauts do. We often think of astronauts as being the people that go into space, but actually the majority of their time is down here on the ground, helping and improving things for the future. We've mentioned Project Artemis, and that's what these astronauts are working on. They're figuring out, well, I went to space, I did some cool stuff, but here's all the knowledge and the information I've brought back from that to help drive these things forward, to develop and innovate and things like that. I guess on the subject of astronauts, do you have any favourite astronauts, Sophie? Obviously, Reinhold might be up there as you've met him and spoken to him. Any others that stand out?
Oh no, that's not like asking me to choose my favourite pet or my favourite. Oh no, I mean Tim Peake's got to be right up there, being our astronaut, and I've been fortunate enough to work with him on several different projects with the academy. Was in a call with him just last week, and again he was so engaging with our lead educators. He's another astronaut who's so keen to get the education out there. Always going to love Samantha Cristoforetti. I think she is a phenomenal role model, and I think that she has achieved immensely good things. And also shout out to the cosmonauts too, particularly Andrei Boroshenko, who is a Russian cosmonaut, and I've had the pleasure of working with him out in Norway and European Space Camp for a couple of years. And again, he's really down to earth, if you'll forgive the pun. He's really engaging, and he's really keen on getting young people interested in science and engineering, but using his space experience to kind of lure them in.
So your answer to that question is all of them, I think. Is
All of them. Basically, every astronaut I've met and quite a few that I haven't.
I only mock because I think that's basically my answer as well. You know, we had a chat beforehand, and I was like, oh, maybe Chris Hadfield, because he's done some amazing videos. We've met him; he's really cool. And then I was like, oh, but people, on the subject of videos, one of my favorite videos is there's a brilliant video of, I've drawn a blank because we're going live now, of the lady astronaut from NASA with long blonde hair. Go on, was that you remembered?
It was Karen, wasn't it?
Yes, Karen Nyberg. Of course it was. Thank you very much. That's the fear of being live for you there, folks. But she did a fantastic video on just something simple as washing her hair. And I love all these little... When you think of something simple that you probably do every day and don't give any thought of down here, but you do all the time. So that video always stands out. And of course, Leland Melvin and the fantastic picture of him with his dogs just before takeoff is a picture that always stands out. But there's so many people to mention, I remember fond times of Helen Sharman visiting the Space Center. I was lucky enough to be taught by Jeff Hoffman. He did a little course during my university project. And there's so many that we could mention to talk about. But yeah, I think astronauts as a general, they're a pretty cool group of people. So we've been talking for a little bit about human spaceflight, and I noticed that the clock is rapidly approaching the end, and I thought we probably ought to talk a little bit about the future of spaceflight. We've mentioned the NASA program, Project Artemis, a couple of times, and we thought we probably ought to leave you a little bit more information about that. So we've got a little clip from Claire, who is doing a little bit of research into exactly what that project involves. So let's hear from Claire.
Artemis is the Greek goddess of the moon, the twin sister of Apollo, so it's fitting that Artemis has been chosen as the name of NASA's spaceflight program to send the first woman and the next man to the moon's south pole in 2024. The program includes the Lunar Gateway, a station around the moon that will be a staging post for missions to the moon's surface and onto Mars. It will have a halo orbit around the moon, providing easy access to Earth and more of the moon's surface, as well as a deep space environment for experiments. It might not be involved in the 2024 landing, but its construction is being planned. It will be launched by the Space Launch System, a huge new rocket for 4-person crews. It will be 2.5 times the size of our rocket tower, and more powerful than the Saturn V. The first launch of the SLS is scheduled to be Artemis 1, a test flight to send an uncrewed spacecraft around the moon in November 2021, in preparation for the 2024 landing. The Orion spacecraft will carry the astronauts. It's similar to the Apollo Command and Service Module. ESA and the UK company Airbus is building the European Service Module, which will provide propulsion, power, air and water for the astronauts, as well as thermal control of the entire spacecraft. There's already been successful tests. Other commercial companies and space agencies, including Japan, will contribute things such as lunar landers to take astronauts to the surface and provide surface operations. Unlike the Apollo program, this is an international effort. Some of NASA's 22nd astronaut group, nicknamed the Turtles, will fly on the Artemis missions to the moon, and may be the first crew to fly to Mars. Artemis can almost be seen as a dress rehearsal for reaching Mars. On the moon, they'll be finding and using water, learning to live and work on another celestial body, and testing the technologies to make this all happen. So prepare yourself for 2024, where we'll hopefully see a woman walk on the moon. Now, it probably won't be me, but I can dream.
Claire always seems to have a lot of fun making those videos, prancing around in a moon suit there at the end. Always good fun to see. So I guess we're almost out of time, but one thing we do want to touch on is we've obviously talked a lot about human spaceflight. We're celebrating 60 years of sending people into space. And I'm sure, and hopefully, there's a couple of people that are watching here today that are thinking, well, maybe they'd quite like to go to space. I know I'd quite like to go to space, and I'm sure you would if you got the opportunity, Soph. And it's actually something that's quite rare, is at the moment we can say, well, that opportunity is right there as we speak. It was just a couple of weeks ago that the European Space Agency actually opened applications for the job of an astronaut. It's a pretty crazy job description to see, but astronaut is a job that you can currently apply for. Now, they don't do this very often. I think the last time was 2008, which was then Tim and Samantha Cristoforetti, who we mentioned, and people like Luca Parmitano, and they made their application and was successful. But now we're seeing another set, and so that's something that's really interesting, and it's not as tricky as people thought to get in. You've got to have a degree. They've asked for a degree in something STEM related. So as you mentioned, science, technology, things like medicine, material science, all that sort of stuff, something a little bit technical, and then a bit of job experience in those areas. But then they've sort of said, as long as you sort of got those basics to get in, actually there's a lot of people that can apply. And I think that's been something that's been really interesting to me, is that they've really opened it up, and we're starting to approach an era where being an astronaut isn't something exclusively restricted to just a very narrow band of people, test pilots as it's traditionally been in the past, or things like that. So I think it's really interesting to see. So I don't know if you've got your application filled out, Soph, or not yet.
Maybe. Have you?
I couldn't possibly comment.
But I think the other thing that's really interesting as well, I mean, they've changed, I believe they've changed the degree requirement to a master's now, on this round. But as you say, they're looking for the right people and the right skills rather than precise qualifications, and they want that life experience as well. What's really exciting to me as well is that in parallel with this program, they're running their para-astronaut program, where they're looking into the viability and what would be necessary, what the steps would be necessary to tweak existing space flight conditions to potentially accommodate those that have got disabilities, that normally would not even be able to consider this in the future. So it's really amazing to see that the European Space Agency is taking that first step in addressing this issue of limiting the space flight experience just to people that are considered conventionally able-bodied. And I'm really, really hoping that this could be the first step on opening that even wider.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I get from the application and the material they put out supporting it. And it's really nice because in the interview with Reinhold earlier, one of the things he said was, don't discount yourself. And I think so many people go, I can't be an astronaut. It's not. I think that not only is just what astronauts say, but also having looked at the ESA application, actually there's probably a lot more people that would qualify. And like you say, they're looking for the right person. They're not looking for a big long list of job skills that you've picked up. There really is. It's more about the person that they're sending to get up there. So I think it's really interesting. And hopefully, you never know, maybe next Yuri's night we'll be celebrating a fantastic member of our audience who's selected to go off on an amazing flight through space.
Wouldn't that be amazing? But of course, we can't forget as well that astronaut is one job within the space industry, and the number of astronauts is limited. It's relatively small, but they are just a small part of a massive space industry formed of hundreds of thousands of engineers, scientists, computer programmers, mathematicians, lawyers, artists, human resources people, doctors. There's a vast range of space careers out there. And, if you love space and you really want to work in the space industry, and I'm particularly talking if we've got any, youngsters at home or people potentially considering a career change, you can go onto a website called spacecareers.uk, which showcases a vast range of potential space careers. And there might be a few there that you haven't thought of.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts. Space chefs, that's always one that I learned of that stood out. I think one of the favourite around our office is NASA used to have a chief smeller, so to make sure things didn't smell if they went into space. So, it takes all sorts of people. You're quite right. Thousands and thousands of people doing different jobs to get us up into space. So there's a lot of exploration to do. And as we keep, expanding our exploration of space, those job roles and job requirements and needs are only going to grow and expand along with it. So hopefully the last 60 years have been inspiring to the people out there in our audience. I know they have for me and for many of the team here at the National Space Centre. But I think what we probably ought to say is thank you very much for joining us all here today for our Yuri's Night celebration. It's been lovely to spend a little bit of time with you guys, chatting to you, answering your questions. Apologies if we didn't get round to your question. I know some of the comments flow past across that way, but you can always get in touch on social media, so either here on our Facebook pages or you can head across to Twitter, and I'm sure you'll find a member of the team happy to have a chat. And hopefully in the near future, back on site. Hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe only a month or so away from being able to welcome people on site. And until then, we're going to continue to do events online like this. So thank you very much for joining us, Sophie. It's been great to see you.
Thank you, Josh. Happy Yuri's Night, everyone.
Yes, happy Yuri Night indeed. And thank you to all you lot for joining us as well. In terms of our next event that we're very excited for is a little bit further away from the space fact that we've perhaps been talking about. And that's our celebration of all things science fiction, especially here in Britain. So a little bit later on, if you want to come and join us, do tune in for our Brit Sci-Fi event. That's tuning up to be a fantastic online event, especially if you're into British science fiction. But thank you very much for joining us here for Yuri's Night. Have a fantastic evening, a fantastic rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you all very soon. See you later.